The biggest benefit is it lays out the proficiency indicators, and those tell you exactly what you're going to be responsible for knowing. Hi, I'm Angela Murray, SHRM SCP, SBHR, and your favorite HR exam coach. I'm continuing my coverage of the SHRM Ultimate Study Guide. This is video 2 in the series. This guide is meant to give you a framework to make sure that on test day, you read pass on that screen. But before you get to test day, you do have to study. So let's start this video by covering some of the most effective study strategies. The first thing you should do is download and read the SHRM BASK. Now, can you study without the SHRM BASK? Of course you can. But will it make things 5 times easier if you use it? Absolutely. The SHRM BASK maps out everything you need to study. But the biggest benefit is it lays out the proficiency indicators, and those tell you exactly what you're going to be responsible for knowing. In my opinion, the proficiency indicators are the most powerful resource that you have available to you, and it is free. The next thing you need to do is create your study plan. An effective study plan has a timeline, a breakdown, and a goal. Your timeline needs to consider the amount of time you have until test day and then allocate that study time accordingly. Make sure you account for your rest days because sometimes you're just not going to feel like studying, and you need to have that built into your plan. Then break down the BASK into manageable pieces and assign specific topics to each study session. Allow room for flexibility. Give yourself weekly goals for content coverage and for practice questions. For example, you might decide that you're going to cover the business cluster in week 1, and your goal will be to score 80% on the quizzes covering that cluster. So that if you don't make 80%, then that goal carries on to the next week. After you've developed your study plan, the next step is to gather your study material. Now, you want to have a good mix of study material, but there is a such thing as too much. I've seen in the past where my students have bought so many resources, they start to feel pressured. They feel like they have to get through all of these things, and if they don't, they feel like they're missing something. Here's a tip. Any reliable resource that you choose has the same information because the BASK is the BASK. There is a defined criteria that SHRM has set, and your study resources have to follow that in order to prepare you for the exam. The trick is making sure you have a reliable resource. You need to make sure that the study resources that you choose are following the BASK. And of course, you want to make sure it resonates with you. That's the biggest difference in study material. Some of it is too formal in the language that they use, or some just doesn't provide the examples, or maybe it just isn't structured in a way that you grasp it. So when you find that resource, or you find that author or that instructor, follow it. If you read a book that really breaks down the competencies for you, seek that author out on other topics. If you find an instructor that speaks to your practicality, then go to that person for all of your study needs. It's fine to add, other resources or supplemental material, but just don't overdo it. Now let's move on to the kind of study material you should use. The first and most important is practice questions. They're a must. You need to try to get practice questions that mimic the actual exam. It doesn't do you any good to practice if you're not practicing the right way. What good is it to practice basketball and when you show up to the game, everybody's playing soccer? You just wasted your time. The purpose of the practice questions isn't just to reinforce your knowledge. It's to understand the framework of the exam and the structure of the questions. It's as important to know how you're going to be asked questions as it is to know what you're going to be asked. So practice questions should always be a part of your daily study plan. You need to periodically take full-length exams as well and take them under timed conditions. You're trying to replicate what you're going to face on test day to build your stamina. One important thing that is often overlooked is the review of the rationale. You do need to review the rationale for both your right and wrong answers so you can understand your mistakes. One source that I recommend for practice questions is the HR Exam Prep with Angela app. It is available in Apple's App Store and the Google Play Store. I've created original questions that mimic the exam quizzes and give you the rationale. You have the ability to time yourself as well as go untimed, but the time gives you a more authentic feel. The second resource I want to highlight is flashcards. Now remember, I told you flashcards are to reinforce concepts and terms. These are not going to necessarily help you with the situational questions. Of course, it will help you to have an understanding of the terms or ideas within those questions. But like as far as directly helping you to answer those questions, it's not going to do that. But flashcards are a good and they're a very convenient way for you to study while you're on the go. So whenever you find yourself maybe with like just an extra few minutes while you're waiting in a line or, you're at your doctor's appointment, you can just pull out your flashcards for a little bit of reinforcement. To get the most out of your flashcards, make sure you're using them front and back. Some days you can review the definition and challenge yourself to identify the terms. Some days you can review the term and then challenge yourself to recite the definition. That makes sure that you're not just memorizing, but you are actually learning the terms. Another helpful technique is to look at the term, then look into the mirror and teach it to yourself. Give examples of when the term would be used and then try to relate that flashcard to real life experience. And that's going to also help increase your retention. So these are really good for your laws or your policies or some of your theories. The final resource I want to highlight is study groups. Now listen, I have a love-hate relationship with study groups. It leans more toward hate, but that was due to my own personal experience. If you watch my SHRM journey, you know what I'm talking about. But I've seen study groups work beautifully. These are a few guidelines to follow to make sure your experience is nothing like mine. Because trust me, you don't want my experience with study groups. First things first, be selective about your members. You should be aiming for 3 to 6 members. Anything beyond that is just too many people and it's just too hard to manage. It doesn't allow for the camaraderie. It doesn't allow everybody to actively participate. And you really need to create a tight-knit community in order for study groups to be effective. Number 2, make sure your study group is diverse. You want diverse experiences, diverse knowledge, diverse perspectives. You need to have your thoughtful, introspective group members as well as your take charge extroverts. Number 3, determine the goal of your sessions. Do not allow your meetings to turn into a gripe session. Now, every now and then, it's okay to vent some frustration, or you might even designate time in every meeting for this, but do not allow the entire study session to be consumed with negativity. The objective of your study group might be quiz questions. It could be flashcard study. It might be teaching, or it might be just a review. But just remember to meet each time with a specific goal and accomplish that. Assign different topics for every meeting and then rotate the responsibility for leading. This is where it's most important to keep your group confined to a small core group of dedicated people so you can keep the gripe sessions out. You also need to make sure that you agree on a meeting cadence. Don't overwhelm yourself. Keep in mind, we're all adults. Many of us have full-time jobs. We have families. So you really need to be thoughtful and determine, how it's going to work. Determine your platform and how often. Then you need to assign somebody to record the progress of the group, like a timekeeper or a housekeeper. This person is going to keep you on track, and you are going to need someone to keep you on track, and you're going to need somebody to steer you back on course when people want to gripe outside of the designated times. I mean, it's just going to happen. And I hope I'm not just being jaded because that was my experience, but I've heard it from lots of other people. Sometimes when the group of people get together and we're all frustrated about the same things, we all want to vent our frustrations, and then it just turns into one person after the other sharing their frustrations. So you need that person who is going to bring the group back together, keep everybody on track. Now, you have an effective study plan. Now it's just time for you to put everything into play and get started. Now make sure that you have your notifications on so that you can get the notifications of each new video in this series. I'm thinking this series is probably going to end up about 10 videos long, but we'll see. I have some things planned for this. I do want this really to be an ultimate study guide, something that you can come back to time and time again for the best advice. All right, so I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.